So we're talking about the head again. Now, the strategy I use with everything is I try and make things as simple. Let's give it a little more oomph here. So let's do that. And here we go. Let's do that. Simple and yet characteristic. So I want to make it as simple as I can so I can get it down quick, so I can change my mind and not feel emotionally attached to it, so I can meet a deadline because I have to draw 20,000 of these for some animated short, or whatever, for any or all those things. I can keep testing, try a simple version, see which simple version I like, but I want to build that into characteristic. So I don't want to make it generically simple. I don't want to draw this beautiful Leyendecker football player head on top as just an egg or a ball. That would be incredibly simple, but it wouldn't be very characteristic. The way I think of it is, if this was marble and I had to sculpt it, how much would I have to chisel? And would I be in trouble because I'm supposed to attach something onto it? So I want to make it as simple as possible and yet as characteristic as possible. So we're going to look at the head here. Let me move this a little bit. We're going to look at the head and look at some of the refinements of those big primary forms and a little bit of the secondary forms given the time. So we've gone through some of the basic characteristic ideas in our earlier lessons, and we didn't have one last week. There was one question about that. I'd taken that a couple of days off because I have 4 kids and 2 of them had birthdays, so we did some birthdays. I always take the day off with the kids on their birthdays. So we took a break last Thursday, so you didn't miss anything if you weren't here last Thursday. Simple yet characteristic. We have those 2 basic structures, the shape of the skull and the mask of the face. And we can make that simple in all sorts of different iterations. And think of it in a profile, think of it as a front view. We see a lot of skull when we get into profile. We see very little skull when we get into a front view. So we can come up with our various iterations of that, choices around that, and we went through some of that. We're going to take that a little bit farther. So those 2 structures, the skull and the face, can be grouped or separated, can be more rounded or more chiseled. And how chiseled we make it, again, is our choice. We can play with that. I like to spend a lot of time creatively playing to figure out the simplest possible choice, and yet quite characteristic, a lot of bang for the buck, not a ton of things to change to get to where we want to go. And if we look at this lovely little Serov, who's a favorite Russian artist of mine, you can see that each character has his own head shape. And so each one is fairly simple and yet characteristic, more boxy, more angular, a little more asymmetry in a couple areas, more egg-like, lots of variations off the same ideas of head. And we'll look to those things and play with them. So the first thing I want to do is remember my LTL. There's going to be potentially, depending on the position of the head, an L between the skull going back and the face going down. It's going to open up a little bit, and we'll feel that connect together, back of the skull to the jaw, one way or another. And there's actually lots of ways we can do it, but that's a simple way to do it. That's an L. If we're a little bit on angle, we might see some of the front of the face. We're seeing some of the front of the face on both of these. And if we think of the center line down the features on the eyebrow line, that L now gets a T. And then that T might have another L as we go from eyebrow line back to the ear. Ear is critical because it's the only feature that's on the side of the head. And where that's placed, how close it moves to the front of the face, how close it moves to the back of the head, gives us a lot of insight into the head position, the proportion, how much is shape of the head, when does the skull becomes the face. It gives us the sideburn, the hairline, the side of the face, the cheekbone, the eye socket, helps plotting things out. So LTL. If it's a straight on front face, we're not getting that L going back over the skull. It's just a straight line down through, and so on. In any kind of 3/4 view, that's where we're seeing that stuff most clearly. So now let's take this a little bit farther. So if we look at a basic head here, we'll see a few things that start to happen as we get a little more characteristic. There'll be a certain proportion to it. We don't want to get it too long or too short. You'll get better with proportions as you go. You'll get to know kind of your weaknesses. I tend to make the legs too short, so we'll make a simple adjustment. I'll make the legs a little longer than I think. It'll probably be about right. There's going to be a certain symmetry to some of the structures like the head and the torso, and a certain asymmetry. Sometimes you might get things off a little bit. He's barely tilted. I've tilted him more. You can decide to redo it or to correct it. We won't worry about those little things because we want fairly big ideas. And so if I fuss around with the little things, trying to get things just right in these little areas, a little too tippy or something like that, it starts to overwhelm me. It gives me too many things to worry about. So I won't worry about them for now. I can always do another one and correct it. Lovely thing about digital is you can backtrack, you can lay layers on it, correct it, that kind of stuff. It's actually best not to do that. I'd rather just leave the mistakes, and then if there's too much mistakes, I go on. So I'll ease into perfection, knowing I'll never get there. But I want to focus on what I want to focus on and not get distracted too much by the little things, unless I'm doing a quite ambitious work here, which we're not. What I'm going to find on most adult heads that aren't very heavy in shape or young in features is the sides of the head get fairly flat, at least for some little bit. Not all the time, but oftentimes. So I will actually think of this head a little bit like a capsule rather than an oval. Capsule has a rounded top and bottom and parallel sides. And they might not be parallel, but I'll think of that and then I'll taper them in towards the more narrow jaw and chin if it needs to be that. It usually is more narrow in jaw and chin. And then if there's high, strong cheekbones, like a stylized Art Deco football player or a young man with strong features, then it might peek in this way. Like so. I'll add that kind of stuff later, but I'll start with my ideal figure, in this case, my ideal head, And my ideal head has parallel sides that are parallel to the center line. So now it can track as I adjust it from front to 3/4 and so on. The center line of the features, through the features, the far side of the head. Well, the other side now is inside. I'll use the sideburn area in front of the ear. Those are all fairly parallel. And then that T will tell me if I'm a little underneath or straight on. Here it's straight on. We'll make it a little underneath just to show you the difference. And I'll go back. T and the L, the other L is up here. But I'll think of those parallel, and then later I'll come back and build out maybe a little bit pudgy high cheekbones, maybe rounded jaw, maybe a cleft chin, and so on. I'll add those variations on top. But that gives me a good kind of start line for me. You might choose, let's do it over here, you might take the simplified hairline, not the bone structure, and think more of a diamond with the tips cut off. That'd be cool too. So think of that. Is there a real basic shape that's a safe go-to that is simple, not super characteristic for all the different types out there, but characteristic enough that you feel comfortable building on, like with clay, or sculpting on like with marble, and removing and maybe adding as you go. So any of these choices are fine. And then we'll get the eyebrow line, and the eyebrows are going to drop, usually down, drop, and they'll drop a lot or they'll drop a little. I'm not going to worry too much about likeness. I'll ease into that if I decide it's a likeness. If it's a true likeness, a portrait commission or something like that, movie poster, I'll carefully drop the eyebrow at the angle it is. But I'm just going to kind of generically drop that in. The eyes will sit in here, somewhere in here. And there'll be at least an eye apart, usually, between them. And I'm just kind of getting the eyeball without the almond there. So any yardstick, any landmarks you want, doesn't have to necessarily be the same every time, although it's probably good, at least at first, to be consistent. It can be tailored to the particular fellow. Almond eyes here, kind of squinty, kind of superhero slits of eyes, kind of stylized, simplified eyes here. So whatever. If that eyebrow falls on down and hits that eye line, that gives me a pretty good bottom plane for the forehead. So one of the things I'm looking for is to feel the forehead both well fitted into the rest of the head, but also its own isolated structure attached to the head. And I specifically want the forehead and the cheekbone separating. So if I can feel, excuse me, a bit of a bottom plane to the forehead. And excuse me. And I can specifically feel that the forehead is more narrow than the cheeks. That's a very good thing, because that's generally the structure. The cheeks around the eye line tend to be the widest part of the whole head. And then it goes narrower to the jaw and chin, although sometimes you get a wide jaw, and narrower to the forehead and skull, although sometimes you get a very full skull. And you notice I have a fuller skull here, and it feels a little too full. So usually it's a little bit less in here in feel. And you need to be careful. We won't get into it today, but oftentimes when we correct like that, we're influenced by the hairstyle. And the skull is quite wide, but the hair thins it out. Even if it's shaved back, you still see the faded stubble of the hairline. You'll oftentimes make this front view just the mask of the face without the skull. So you are probably going to want to make that wider, but it will oftentimes feel like it's doing this very wide at the cheekbones, more narrow at the skull. That's really kind of more narrow at the temple, and then the back of the skull fills out. So beware. We'll look at that another time. For now, we're going to kind of just deal with this with a hairline on it. I keep being gruff voice. I apologize. So that fits in there. And you can tailor those eyebrows so that they're more specific to the character you're drawing. But notice what I aimed for was the arch of the eyebrows. That became my construction line for my T, the arch of the eyebrow, because that's the top, and then it depresses a little bit towards the brow, and it falls back quite strongly in both these cases down the temple, down the kind of the side corner planes here. So this gives us a natural landmark. It's not exactly right, it's just hair, but it's very, very close and good enough most of the time. And if we see it in a 3/4 view, you'll see that temple roll back. And you can see that here with the highlight. Actually, it gets lost in the hair, but the highlight rolls that back. We'll see that another time, a little more carefully. And the cheek comes in from here. And moves under for the underside of the nose or the mouth, somewhere in here. Just do that. I don't want to do that. It doesn't look good. We'll just do this in here for the moment. And before it ever gets there, it falls down this way and can bump in again sometimes, oftentimes, to the narrower chin. So we have this kind of waterfall. Action from very wide cheeks to very narrow chin. If you ever look at the old, I can't remember, I don't think they did it in the new ones, but the old Planet of the Apes, which is a big sci-fi movie when I was a kid, the original one. And their makeup, this is all monkey hair, and this is all monkey skin, and it showed that bone structure very nicely. Give or take the monkey man they were calling out. So this is all side plane. This is all side plane. And it's more complicated than that. There can be several planes in that front section and several planes in this side and side corner section. But that's a nice simple way to do it. And that gives us most of the information. And I'm doing it, I might well want to place the position of the nose in any of the features. But I don't want to draw them necessarily yet unless I'm very adept at the structure, because what I really want to feel is the biggest possible, not just simple, but the big and simple structures of the head and the face, and then make them ever more characteristic. And so what I want to feel then is, whoops, I don't want to feel that. I want to feel the whole cheek. The whole cheek, front of the cheek, sides of the cheek, front of the forehead. Always have trouble drawing things straight on this digital pad for some reason. I'm not sure why. It's at a good position. Just throws me sometimes. So we want to feel that whole kind of structural system, the biggest possible structure. That's the landscape for then the terrain of the features. That's the big map, and then the topography of these lesser mountains and valleys go on top of it. So we're going to look past, imagine through the nose, which is a wedge that pushes out prominently. And then later we'll add that on. And we'll do that in a really crude way if we want it first. It'll look a little snout-like maybe, a little oversimplified, but eventually it will then interrupt the cheekbones as we have to step over that bridge, that big wedge of a nose. But we want to feel this connection here. If we draw this and this and this, sometimes these things get out of whack. We want to think all the way across. So that fits there, and then the ears are somewhere in here. And if we were to look at this at a 3/4 view then, just going to draw a little bit of the hairline there, just so you can see. And then this is very horizontal. I'm going to lift it up ever so slightly, really right across the ear. I never like that. So I want that to be up a little bit and that to be down a little bit so we can feel the box logic. If I say, here's my box, you're not going to feel like it's a box. But if I can be a little underneath it, even when it's not, or a little on top of it, that's more than a little, isn't it? Even when it's not, we're going to feel by design that volume. So I always like to throw things a little off axis if they get too stiff and straight. Eyebrow drops down, extends until it hits the eye line. Here's the eye socket in here. Here's the nose in here, just so you can see it. Like so. And here is the forehead. There's the side plane of the forehead. I'm not going to do the lighting. Here's the underside of the forehead. Through the nose, ignoring the nose. And over the eye structures, the eyeball, eye socket. And we'll just leave this here. It's very simple. Notice we can refine it as we get more confident. So I could chisel that little corner off there. So we pick that up there. And then notice what happens here now if we extend this idea. So we have the cheeks wider than the forehead. And how do those work together? Let's do this. We've got the forehead coming down, eye socket coming out, cheekbone meets that. And remember, it falls down like a waterfall. Oops. Like a waterfall. Notice that the highlight sits right at that same corner. Look how generic my structure is. Look how specific his structure is. And yet the highlight sat right there. And what we'll find is when we get into value, which we will at some point, the values, the really light values, the really dark values, the middle values, they'll all try and hang to a corner. They'll start or finish at a corner. So the highlight is sitting right at the corner. And if we wanted to be technical about it, it's actually a little corner plane because it's thick between the front of the cheek and the side of the cheek. So it has a facet of its own. And that's what we call box logic, is the shapes. We think of them like boxes, at least for a little while. Then we'll find the values will bump up against the corners of the box and fill the side or whatever planes of the box. The forehead is going to come up here. And it's kind of thick paint in there, but the highlight comes all the way down here. It got dirty over time. whatever shot was made was shot over that dirt and a little bit of shadow from the camera. But it's coming up, but it doesn't come up like the simple boxy front we had. That was simple, but it wasn't quite characteristic enough. No, it goes up for just a little while. Let's see here. Let me dust that down a little bit. Try it again. It goes up just a little while, and then it curves back. Why does it curve back? It curves back because the mask of the face, which is a little boxier, the boxy mask of the face is flowing into the rounded curve of the skull. And the top, the skull cap, is going into the temple line, and it's sheared off. Loomis and Stan Proco. Stan likes this too from Loomis. And it's a good idea. You take a ball and then you slice the side off the ball, and that creates a temple line. Like so. So that's kind of what we have here. This is all side temple, and this is all side cheek to make it simplified. And we have that kind of action, but we can make it a little more nuanced. It's temple. Still see top of the skull up there. It's not perfectly flat, but good enough. A nice, simple yet characteristic choice. And then the cheek comes down and falls from cheek to mouth. Falls again from mouth to chin, and we have that waterfall of flowing down stream over the protruding rocks and such. Like so. And all of this, although the nose is attached, the nose goes off in its own way, in its own direction, and a little bit of its own perspective. So we want to get that wide cheek, narrow forehead bit, and it's tricky at first. Notice where the shadow is here. Not perfectly there. There's actually a little corner plane, but in that ballpark. Notice where the lightest, kind of not fully highlight really, but lightest halftone there. Again, in that ballpark. Everything outside of that hotter light is temple. Everything outside of that darker shadow is temple. And it might include a little bit of nuanced planes. It does. But that simple truth is good enough. So this is a corner plane and then a side plane. Maybe instead of doing this, it does that. We add a little corner plane. We can add more and more of those. But that gives us a simple truth. Simple truth. Got it. Simple truth. Sits in there. And then the the hairline will track off of that in some way or another. We won't really go into hairlines today, but it'll fit in here. It'll have a symmetry or a slight asymmetry depending on the hairstyle. Those side swept bangs coming down here, getting lost in the reference here. It has a shape that hides the skull. We won't worry about that stuff, but that'll cover over. But despite that intrusion of where the hairline pulls in and the sideburns drop down, we'll see this kind of thing. That monkey face makeup from the 60s kind of thing. We want to feel this going back around. Understand how that flows back in, how that flows back in, even though we have a radical interruption of it. So that's what we're after. Let's see how we're doing on time. We're about out. So next week, we're going to look at profiles. Profiles are really telling, because if we can understand profiles really well, and specifically understand the ear to the eye socket, not the eyeball, not the eyebrow, the eye socket, we get a real sense of where something is sitting very, very quickly. Look at that wonderful head of this guy on the right. You can see the L has really opened up because he's laid back in perspective. And then it's a very simple pickup of the eye socket, a little suggestion of the eye in there. That full cheek. Nose behind, that goatee and such. But notice how by relating this back, in this case back and up, to the ear, we instantly get that head beautifully placed in space. Really lovely, simple. And then he builds that forehead out later. But with just a few marks, you get a tremendous amount of information about where that head is, both two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. He's doing it with just a few lines. And Serov was brilliant with just making a few marks that said a lot. And this says a lot. So we'll talk about the power of those profiles to understand a clearer image of what the head's doing and its relationship of side to front and top to bottom, so we can start to get on top and underneath this as it's moving around. So anyway, that's a tease for next time. We'll see you next time, but let me real quickly, I forgot to do it. I always forget to do it. Just let me remind you, we do this every week. You can find the links in the posts on my different social media sites, either the day of or past. You can get to that link, sign up, be on our mailing list. We'll send you reminders for this, and you can just link right out of your own email. Also, we have a Patreon channel that helps support it. We get a little money out of that each month to help support the actually team that helps me do this and some of the other things that support this. So if you want to support the live streams, you could support the Patreon. It's $8 a month, not a lot. For some of you in different countries, it is a lot, and that's why this is free. I also have a coaching program. So if you're interested in really leveling up and helping somebody have a team, really, my team and me help support you in that and implement kind of radical leveling up of your skill set and your mindset. You can ask about that.